Welcome to the tutorial for the Tidebrook trousers. Let's start with a little bit of pocket prep. So this is my back pocket. You can see it's cut too. There's a fold line there that I've marked with some little nips here, just so that I know where to fold. And I've chosen the correct size pocket for the size trousers I'm making. There are 3 options. So first of all, I'm just going to press my pocket that first centimetre seam allowance and then to where that snip was for the fold. So that's all pressed nicely. It just makes it easier to stitch. Now we're going to fold it back on itself so it's right sides together, but I'm leaving that centimetre seam allowance tucked up there, and I'm just going to sew my centimetre seam allowance on these corners. This just makes it look a little bit nicer when you stitch them on. You can't see the seam allowance on the inside of the pocket. So we're going to bag these out. Let's give it a little trim. Just trim off the corners and snip it down a little bit, as it's a denim. It's a 6-ounce denim, which isn't terribly thick, but it's obviously just a bit more bulky than a plain cotton. There we go. Let's neaten those up, and then we're just going to pull those through. Get those corners nice and pointy. Get rid of all our little scrappy bits. And then I'm going to press back the seam allowance all around the rest of the pocket, which is a centimetre seam allowance again. So there we go, all pressed beautifully, and we just need to stitch on the edge here. You could do some fancy top stitching on your pockets. That always looks quite nice. I know lots of people like to do that for their jeans. Could use a contrasting colour stitch. All sorts of fun you could have. So there we go, one pocket. Now we're going to prep the front pocket. So here we go. This is my Tidebrook front pocket pattern. You need to cut a pair of these because there's one on each side. This is my foldy flappy down bit. That's a technical term. Again, I've cut out the correct size for the trousers I'm making. And I've put a bit of interfacing along here only because it's on the bias and it just holds it so that it doesn't stretch, but totally optional. So let's get this the right way around. Here we go. So I'm going to fold up the centimetre seam allowance here again and give it a press, and then I'm going to fold it over to where that fold line was and give that a press again. Oops, there we go. So there we are, the centimetre, and then I've folded it on the fold line, and I'm going to stitch it on the edge. Again, you could do some fancy top stitching here if you wanted to. There we are, that's secured down. And again, I'm going to press back the centimetre seam allowance around the edges of my pocket before I apply it, so it's all ready to go. So I've done those 3 edges, not the top and the side, because they will be going into seams. All ready to go. So now we're going to apply the back pocket. I've marked in chalk the placement which was on the pattern, but these are the important bits, these little dashes here. So the way I'm going to mark it, obviously I've drawn this on the wrong side in chalk, and I'm just going to pop a pin through each of those points, which are the sort of key anchor points, and then turn it around, and then you can see you can easily transfer it onto the correct size without marking your fabric. It's just a quick, easy way to do it. So I'm just going to transfer these pins quickly and then grab my pocket. Here we go. Now, always it's a suggested placement, so it's up to you where you really want it, but it's a good guide to start from. So I'm going to pin this in place using those points of reference, and I'm going to stitch around this outside edge really close to the fold. Again, you could do a double top stitch or something. Do back tack when you start. Oh, get that pin out there. And then when you get to the corner, leave your needle in, lift your foot up, pivot, and then carry on stitching. Gives you a lovely nice crisp corner. Again, needle down, pivot, and off you go again. tack to finish. There we are, one pocket. Give that a press. So now we're going to apply the front pocket. Here's my pattern. I'm showing you this because there's lots of notches that you need on here because they're a twisted seam. I've put extra notches on. The ones at the top for the waistband and for the centre front. You've got a side one here for pocket. There's several. There's a lengthen shorten line, which I've done a little blog for in case you were a little bit unsure about how to lengthen and shorten these trousers, given they've got this sort of twisted, strange seam. Okay, so I'm just going to unpin that and take one of my fronts and one of my pockets. There we go. So there's a little notch there and a little notch there. And the way I've cut these pockets is that there's a lot of ease in the entrance to the pocket, for want of a better word, because I like to be able to put my hands in without distorting my garment. I've done this on the Arundel skirt as well, so look, you can see it just stands proud of the trousers a bit so that you've got space for your hand. If you don't like that, then just repin it and cut that extra piece off. But like I say, I find practicality wise it's useful. So I'm going to pin around the edges here. These need to be nice and flat. And I'm going to stitch around all around the outside, except for obviously where the pocket opening is, just to sort of secure it all so that it's all together for when I do my side seam and inside leg as well. So just whizzing down the side. I've done that within the centimetre seam allowance so it doesn't show. And then I'm going to stitch as I did for the back pocket, quite near the edge, near the fold, and needle in and foot up for pivoting for the angled corners. Nice back stitch when you get to an area that might have a lot of wear and tear. There we go, so that's all secured down. Let's have a look. Yeah, so I've got a nice big pocket and these edges are flush and it all lies flat. Next job is to prep the waistband. So I've got two pieces. I've got the front here, which is cut to on fold, one of which I've interfaced. That one is the outer one, which is uninterfaced, and this is the inner one, which is got the interfacing on. And then I've got one back waistband that I've cut to the correct size. But first we're going to do the front. So match your top curves. This concave curve is the top of the waistband, so I'm going to stitch a centimetre in from the edge all along. There we go. Then I'm going to clip and grade that seam. Just snipping in every 2 or 3 centimetres. And then I'm going to grade it down. It's a very soft, gentle curve, but it just helps to make it a nice, even, crisp line when you've pressed it. There we go, that's graded. So you could press this at this point and press that seam towards the interfaced part of the waistband. Now I'm going to grab my back waistband and you'll see I've put little snips for my centre backs on the top and the bottom, and I have on the front as well actually, because this is really useful when you're applying your waistband, just to have an extra kind of point of reference. Here we go. So I'm going to open this up, and again I'm pressing that seam allowance towards the interface, that's the under part of your waistband at the front, and then I'm going to open up this back section and pin it to the front. So this is basically your side seam that we're doing here. So pop a pin in, and I'm going to stitch down there a centimetre. I'm going to do the same on the other side. So pushing that seam allowance up towards the interfaced section. Make sure you haven't got your waistband twisted. I'm just going to pop a little pin in there. Okay, let's get this stitched. So back tack, centimetre seam allowance, and back tack to finish. There we go. So you can see you've got a continuous loop now. No twists in it. So I basically want to press these seam allowance open and then press my waistband in half that way. So there we go, that's all pressed. There you go, you can see that's the front and that bit is the back. And I'm just going to pop a stitch right on the edge at the top, just because I find it helps to stop the elastic from twisting in the channel, and also it just gives it a nice edge, really keeps it again nice and crisp. So there we go, that's my waistband ready to go. Now I'm going to stitch up the inside leg and the side seam on my trousers. So I've got a front and a back, right sides together. And I'm going to, this is where all your notches come in handy. Matching up, starting at the top. Pin down the length of my inside leg. It's a softly curving seam, but it's such a soft curve, it's very easy to navigate. Let's put one more pin in there. There we go. So starting from the top, stitching down a centimetre. Oh, one more pin. Here we go. There we are, that's the first seam done. I'm just going to press this one way, both seam together, really. Give that a quick press. There we are, look, you can see I've pressed both the seams together. So next I am going to just do a little stitch on this vent. You could just overlock it, turn it and stitch it. If you don't want the vent, just cut it off, or just have a look at the pattern and trim it down so that it's a straight leg and a straight seam. I'm going to do a little turn and turn on this bit. So I'm just doing a tiny little hem. A really simple way to do this is to just turn it once and stitch it, and then turn it again and stitch it, if you're not so nimble. There we go, that's both sides. Give those a quick press. Fabulous. Then I'm ready to do that seam. So this is my outside leg seam. Again, plenty of notches down here to help you. So seek those out first, match those angles at the bottom, and then fill in with a few more pins. If you feel more confident tacking a seam first, then do that, that's fine. Starting at the top, working all the way down and navigating that angle at the bottom. Let's go. So back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance, right sides together. Aligning the notches as you go. And just working your way down from the waist to the hem. When you get to that angle, stop, needle in, pivot, and stitch again. There we go. So that's it, that's both the seams done. Now all we need to do is give it an overlock and a press. So there we go, I've overlocked mine. You could zigzag if you don't have an overlocker, use a zigzag stitch on your sewing machine, or an overcast stitch if you have one of those. Now I'm going to turn it through, and again, like I said, I'm going to give that a nice press. The side seam I'm going to press towards the back just because the pocket adds a little bit of bulk, so I think it just sits nicer. So again, all pressed the same way. There we go, one trouser leg. Next job is the crotch seam. So I've got two legs that I've sewn up here and pressed. One's inside out, one's the right side out. So I'm going to pop the one that's right side out inside the one that's inside out, matching the crotch seams or the inside legs. Here we go. So let's lay these on top of each other, right sides together now. There we go. Let's get some pins. So that's my centre front line there, my notch indicating that, so that's important. Let's start pinning there. And again, let's lie these on top of each other so the raw edges are together. And next I'm going to measure the distance from the raw edge to that centre front notch, and I'm going to mark with my chalk a line so that I can stitch along that line. This just forms a faux fly really, which again you don't have to have, you can just stitch down or trim it off or whatever if you don't like that. But I quite like it. Breaks up the front of the trousers a little bit. So I'm using that line now as my stitch line. I'm going to match these inside legs seams. And I'm doing the back seam here. A few pins in. I'm going to start at the top, back tack, stitch all the way around using my centimetre seam allowance and back tack to finish. Here we go. You could probably press that line in if you find that easier, but it doesn't matter if you use chalk or a pencil or whatever, as long as it's a something washable, because it will be on the inside of your trousers anyway. Navigating that inside leg seam juncture. There we go. So I'm going to overlock this now. Again, you could use your zigzag or your overcast. There we go. And I'll show you, I put a little snip in there at that angle just so that I could hold it open and get all the raw edges. So I'm going to turn these through to the right side, and I'm going to fold back that faux fly bit to the left. That's the ladies' way, but hey, it's 2025, so you can sew it whichever way you want. Pinning the fly down to the trouser, and I'm going to follow this line and stitch it through. You can do it from the right side or the wrong side. I did it from the right side because I could feel the stitching through, but sometimes it's easier from the wrong side. Give it a press, and there you go, one faux fly front. Okay, so let's attach the waistband. There's my waistband that I made earlier. You can see the interface bit there, which is the underneath. So I like to do mine back to front. There's my centre front notch, there's my centre front notch there. So I do right side to wrong side. So I attach it first to the wrong side of my trousers. I'm matching that centre front notch to that stitch line, which matches up with the centre front notch on my trousers. And I'm going to match the side seams. So this is the interfaced part of our front waistband that I'm stitching to the inside of my trousers first. Let's anchor that side again, and then I'll find the centre backs. Okay, make sure it's not twisted. And then you want the under bit. There's my centre back. There it is. There's my little notch, look. So I'm going to pin that to the inside of my back trouser at the crotch seam there. And then just pin in between. Okay. So centimetre seam allowance all around that seam. Let's go. There we are. So that's the inside stitched. You'll see that the front is still raw. So I'm going to take this away and I'm going to press this seam allowance up into the waistband, and I'm also going to turn over my waistband a centimetre on the other side, look, so that I can fold it down and stitch it. So starting at the centre back again, I'm just going to stitch the back of my waistband at this point. I do waistbands all sorts of different ways. I like to try and show different ways where I can, because I think, you know, everybody has their own favourite way, so it's just nice to try something new. So I'm stopping pinning 4 or 5 centimetres from the side seam. I'm just going to stitch this down now. So I'm just top stitching it. I like to do it this way round because it will always look nice on the right side. Doesn't matter what happens on the inside, whereas if you do it the other way around, I find it much harder to get a really nice finish on the front. So there we go, that's the back waistband. I've stitched that down. Now I've got a piece of elastic here. This is 3.5 centimetres wide, and it's half your waist measurement plus 2 centimetres. So, oh, wrong side, turn it over, there we go. I need to just poke that in there. I'm using safety pins, but you know, if you've got a fancy gadget, obviously use that. And then I'm going to, importantly, safety pin this edge to my side seam. So your elastic extends the centimetre past the side seam. And then we're just going to fiddle this through, trying not to twist it too much. When it comes through the other side, you want to just check it's not twisted, and if it is, just make sure it's lying flat. So give it a little bit of time to make sure it's perfect before you pin it down. That's it, that's flat now. So this one pins to that side seam. And I'm going to stitch in the ditch. So I'm going to stitch in that actual seam. Here we go. It's on the inside of your trousers, so if you don't get it completely in the seam, it doesn't really matter, but just secure it down. Here we go. So there you go, that's my elastic in, and you can see there's a centimetre overlap there, and you can't see the stitching because it's in the ditch. And I've done the same on the other side. So all you have to do now is pin the remaining waistband, which doesn't have the elastic in, so it's much simpler to stitch. You don't have to fight with the elastic. and then just top stitch the last bit. Here we go. There we are, beautifully top stitched waistband and an elasticated back. So now we're going to do the hems. Now if you don't want the vent, then obviously you'll just turn it up and stitch it. I'm going to bag out this little bit of vent, so I'm folding it back and I'm stitching. This is very similar to how we did the top of the pockets. I'm just going to trim it down a little bit so it's not so bulky. Turn it through. There we go, just get that corner out. So that's all bagged out, that's nice. And then I'm going to turn it and stitch it, but you could do a turn and turn if you wanted to, if you didn't like the overlocking showing, but I'm just going to turn it up a centimetre and I'm going to stitch. So here we go, back tack to start, centimetre seam allowance here I've used, and I'm just stitching straight across. Now let's have a look at that. So there you go, you can see it's all nicely bagged out and it's stitched up, ready for some buttons. Give it a press. Let's get rid of these threads. There we go. So I'm going to tidy it up a little bit and then I'm going to pop some buttons on. I'm going to hand sew mine because I like a cup of tea and a sit down and a hand sew, but if you like to machine sew them, you go for it. There we are. I've used some big, bright, shiny contrast buttons so you can see them clearly, and you can see I've literally just stitched it all the way through, so those don't open. You could do fancy buttonholes if you wanted, but I haven't. So there you have it. Elasticated waist, pockets, twisted seams, and some buttons. You should have something that looks like this.